Employers of Reddit. What is the most inappropriate piece of clothing someone has worn to a job interview? Story 1. I saw one guy come from a country club pool in an American flag tank top and swim trunks to the club's golf cart boy interview. He didn't get the job and then came back a week later in a full suit apologizing for his previous attire. Story 2. I worked in the US Senate a couple years back. We were interviewing about half a dozen candidates for a pretty junior position. One of the interviewees was wearing a Harvard t-shirt, a Harvard jacket, and Harvard sweatpants. We were astounded. The first question my coworker asked was, "Did you go to Harvard?" The guy did, and he handled the rest of the interview surprisingly well. He didn't get the job, but he did become a running joke in the office for a while. Story 3. Homecoming dress. She knew she was supposed to dress up for the interview, and that was the nicest thing she had. I felt so bad she was incredibly embarrassed. It was her first real interview, and in the end I gave her credit for at least putting in the effort. Edit for everyone asking, yes, she did get a job offer. The attire didn't factor in nearly as much as her coming in prepared, on time, and with questions. Story 4. A pair of flesh-colored leggings that made her look as if she wasn't wearing pants at all. A sweatshirt that opened in the front, that had been pulled to the side a bit to reveal a lacy camisole top. We work as therapists. No way she got that job. For more info, both her wig and glasses were askew. There was an odor somewhere between human and cat urine, and about halfway through she asked if she could take a break because she left her car running to charge her phone. Story 5. He came into the IT interview in polo, khakis and aqua-colored Crocs with an anime-made blushing painted on one and lining up a sniper shot on the other. He was late because security was concerned about his MLP chain wallet. Story 6. I worked with a guy who applied to the local big city fire department. Apparently all candidates had to submit a passport-type photo of themselves. Although I fail to see how that's relevant. Diversity quota perhaps. Anyways, this guy was a gym nut and also sent a full head and torso photo of himself, with no shirt on. When I asked him why, he replied, "So they know I'm not a twink." Well, it must have worked, as Twinkie is now a firefighter. Story 7. I interviewed a young woman who wore a skirt so short I did actually see her underwear when she sat down. The underwear was pink. I gave her feedback later that she should have worn a suit. This was for a business analyst role. Everyone else was wearing a suit. Story 8. PJs. She was pulled out of bed and brought to me and my boss for an interview she didn't know she was having. After 5 minutes we offer her a job and she actually turned out really well. Story 9. A few years back, I had someone show up fresh out of the swimming pool, hair wet, bathing suit and cover up on, still wet, hadn't taken the time to dry off. I went through the interview and a test simulation of the job with her. She actually did very well at the simulation. When I took her to see my boss that made the ultimate decision, he took one look and said no, didn't ask about the simulation or anything, just no. Edit 1. Not a lifeguard position. It was for a small textile company that manufactures clean room supplies. 2. Boss was a complete. I have numerous stories about why he did and didn't hire someone after I did initial interview assessment. Story 10. One time I was having dinner in a restaurant and saw a young woman come up to the counter and ask for a job application. The employees gave her one and she sat down near me to fill it out. This is when I noticed she was wearing a cap with a huge pot leaf on it. She finished it, returned it to the counter, and asked what the follow-up would be. The employee said, "We'll contact you in a few days for an interview, and when you come back, don't wear that hat." Story 11. Back when I was an hourly manager at Walmart, guy came in with greasy hair, white t-shirt full of holes and sweatpants, and to top it all off, he looked like he had a semi. Surprisingly he didn't smell, and the clothes actually looked clean. So that was good, but still I gave him a hard no, but the overnight assistant gave him the go. Because he wasn't going to be on her shift, and she thought it was hilarious. This guy was a nightmare, wore that same outfit, now never washed, almost daily, smelled like death, and cumin, and he was crazy. We were finally able to fire him after he pulled out his pocket knife and cut his coworker. Thankfully the cut didn't cause any real damage to the kid, but seriously, WTF. Story 12. I was the person, this was 20 years ago, and I had just moved to the city. I was 17 and spent 3 weeks working as a hostess at Denny's. A friend asked if I wanted to go rollerblading, so I was strapped into my rollerblades and was wearing athletic wear. She then pulled up to her gym, had me walk in my rollerblades up to the second story where the daycare was, and told me that I was interviewing for the nanny job that she heard was available. I actually got the job because the woman who owned the gym was impressed that I could climb stairs in my rollerblades. Story 13. A tight muscle shirt. It's great that you work out, big guy, but it's not a gym, plus he only worked his glamour muscles. He was thick around the middle, dude, at least give the office a show. Story 14. I have one from just last month. This guy was coming in to interview for a financial advisor program. Everyone in our office dresses very professional, and most people I interview are dressed in their best suits. This gentleman came in wearing a stained white dress shirt, with a yellow-tinted white undershirt. I forget what kind of pants, but he had a cloth Joker belt "Why So Serious" written all over it with a Joker's face neon green and black that he didn't loop through the rest of his pants and was swaying around when walking. He also had very long creepy fingernails that were very dirty and he kept rolling and rubbing his fingers together to get the dirt off subconsciously. The icing on the cake was he coughed and snorted something up very loudly, then swallowed it, then loudly commented "nice." Somehow this guy aced our assessments and put together a great resume, but was just the exact opposite of professional. We are still not sure if he was trying to with us, or was that terribly oblivious. I just assumed he was interviewing for someone else, like Ben Affleck in Good Will Hunting. Story 15 had a candidate come in for a recruiting role. She was young and beautiful, but she was wearing some of the tightest yoga pants ever. Nothing was left to the imagination. Her top looked great though. Story 16 not an employer, but I recently watched this train wreck happen. My boyfriend's second job just hired several new people, and I were hanging out at his place of work after his shift was over, and we had the pleasure of witnessing an interview. Please note that this is a pretty casual place. All of the workers there wear jeans and gym shoes or boots to work. Their uniform is a t-shirt with a company logo, although sometimes the workers come in wearing a different, occasionally nicer, tops depending on if there's an event there or something. Interviewee shows up wearing the tiniest, tightest, sparkliest party dress I've ever seen in my life. It barely covered her nipples. Her entire braless back was exposed, and when she sat down on the chair for her interview, her whole bare hit the chair because the dress could not physically stay over her bottom while sitting. She was also wearing 6-inch heels. No offense meant towards prostitutes truly, seeing as how my best friend was one for a bit, but she honest to God looked like she had just walked in from the street corner. The only place that outfit would have been appropriate was in a bedroom, really. I cannot stress enough just how little clothing this lady was wearing. It was truly one of those situations where you knew you weren't supposed to stare, but you just couldn't look away. There were customers there at the time as well, and nearly all of them were staring at her in shock, the exception being a couple of men who were there with their wives. Those men were staring straight forward, wide-eyed, not daring to move their heads an inch, lest their wives think they were looking like it was a spectacle. Anyway, so the next day, finds out they hired her. Apparently the skeevy old owner of the place liked, her resume after all. Hopefully she remembers to wear pants or at least underwear when she starts. I was a recruitment manager for a call center and oh man, let me list a few 20-something-year-olds strolling in with sweatpants that say I smoke weed 420 all over them, literally. A t-shirt that said I hate work, a giant gold necklace that said bitch leggings with way too much camel toe, a stripper who came to her interview straight from work. An old man who for some reason made holes in his shirt for his nipples to be exposed. Ninja Turtle pajamas, a man who actually wore decent clothing but then tried to take off his clothing and lay like a plank on the lobby floor. When he went to the elevator, he burned off the buttons with a lighter. None of this is made up. What an experience. Story 17 it wasn't so much of inappropriate clothing. It was more the action of uncrossing her legs very wide while wearing a short skirt, meanwhile never taking her eyes off mine. Yeah, she was an HR nightmare waiting to happen. Story 18 woo boy, the guy without pants. At my last job, I spent 10 months in 2017 on a research team doing statistical learning research for health informatics. It's a very large healthcare company, and they basically took almost a dozen of their PhD researchers from, and market dev, temporarily reassigned them to the new Center for Data Excellence. 2 of the PhDs were director AVP level, so they each got to bring a team member with them. My director brought me from market dev because my background's in mathematical modeling, but the other guy didn't have anyone in his department who was free enough to bring along, so they posted the job and started interviewing. I do the pre-interview stuff with one of the junior PhDs, and then the senior team members who come in. Anyway, for days into interviewing, we get one dude up on Skype for his interview, and he's way too close to the screen, like his laptop's up on his knees. We asked him to move the laptop back a bit, and he gives it up that he can't, because the lower part of his shirt has a huge fresh coffee stain, and his pants are hanging on the adjacent wall. Head lost track of time and rushed home, and Head spilled his coffee in his hurry. We told him no problem, we'll find a new time for you, the shirt might be a goner, but be sure to wash the pants in hot water right away. We actually hired that dude, and I think he's still there, great guy, fellow I knew was the counselor at the unemployment center. He said he had to explain to one guy he was coaching for job interviews, don't wear that hat that says beer makes me smart. Story 19 an extremely short dress, but I ended up hiring her because she had experience. Turned out she was pregnant, coming from school, and her husband had met her at the interview site so she could change clothes, and that is what he had brought. She was so embarrassed, but did not have time to go home and change into something else. She ended up being the best worker I had ever hired. Don't judge a book by its cover. Story 20 I've never had to deal with inappropriate clothing at an interview before, but and probably worse I did have to try to explain away to elected officials and citizens at a public consultation meeting why the engineering consultant we contracted out for a portion of developing the town's strategic plan showed up in a Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops. Reason I gave: he wanted to stand out and field as many questions as possible by sticking out like a sore thumb and seeming approachable. Real reason: this was his last gig before retirement, so he had zero, and he had just signed his divorce papers that morning and spent the afternoon drinking at the hotel bar with his lawyer. Unfucking real. Nothing in his contract dictated anything about attire, since 99% of what he was paid to do was going to be done from his winter place in Arizona, only that he would be expected to show up at any public consultations. You better believe our standard contracts going forward included a clause on it. Story 21 I worked for a high-end software development firm. We wore business casual, and were fairly on the casual end of that, but one day someone showed up to the interview in a bright fluorescent orange, oversized hoodie, cargo pants, and sandals. They did not get the job. Story 22 a see-through shirt. I could make out the details of her bra. Right after that, a candidate came in with one eye in bright green shadow liner mascara, the other eye was completely free of makeup. poor attention to detail. That was weird day. Story 23 late to the party, but I had a young guy come in one day who I think was clearly trying to not get the job. Like his dad gave him an ultimatum to get a job or get out type of thing, and he was just going to interviews to appease him. He had his hair in pigtails high on the sides of his head with wire threaded in them so they'd stick out. Black t-shirt that said FUCK on it in giant white letters. Plaid schoolgirl style skirt, rainbow tights, 90s chunky club kid style shoes. Story 24 I have a story. I work at a hotel. One day a young lady came in asking about a housekeeping job. Our executive housekeeper was still there, so I called her office. Let her know she had a potential applicant. She said she had a moment. She'd be right over. She came out, took one quick glance at her and told her we're not hiring. The lady left. The executive housekeeper then told me not to send anyone looking like that to her. I asked why. She said, "Did you look at her? The young lady was wearing very tight jeans with holes in them, and it was obvious that she wasn't wearing any underwear since half her rear end was showing. She had on what looked like stripper heels, and was wearing a halter top so tight it left nothing to the imagination." Story 25 finally. A thread I have an answer for. I worked in a phone shop salesman and we had an open day hiring event, where anyone could walk in and be interviewed. We were always desperate for staff because the turnover was insane, due to the job being sold as a dream and being more of a nightmare. Most people showing up were in smart casual, what you would expect for an interview, but one guy had some real BDE. From bottom to top it went ripped jeans, Che Guevara top, 2 sweatbands on his wrists, and the creme de la creme, a snapback cap with a phrase "what you think" printed on it. What possessed this guy to think it was a good idea to wear a hat that literally calls out the interviewer's opinion of them, I will never really know. All I do know though, is out of the 50 or so odd interviewees, this guy was miles above the rest in terms of how well he interviewed. As you'd imagine, he didn't get offered the job for purely his clothing, proving that you should always at least make an effort. And don't wear a hat cussing the interviewer, not an employer, but I had put in an application for my current job and was asked if I could come in and interview within a couple of hours. I was volunteering at a therapy stable in the summer heat when they called. I told them that I was not at all dressed to impress, but I was willing to come in anyway. So I walked in there in yoga pants, a tank top, and muck boots, sweaty and stinking of horses. I got the job. Story 26 me. Back in ancient times when you still got an application, I walked into a Dillard's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, went to customer service and asked for an application. An older, extremely well-dressed lady was there and she asked me if I owned a suit. I said if you hire me I will get one. She said go back to men's and get fitted. She was the area sales manager for women's shoes at the time, and as far as I know still, Dillard's had a policy that women's shoes would have an attractive young man in a suit. Apparently I qualified as attractive. Her previous token had just been transferred to a much larger store because he was so good at his job. Our store was kind of the minor leagues and she needed to get a new live body male that day. The next not gargoyle who walked in was getting hired. I walked in and was not a gargoyle. Last thing she told me was never come in this store in jeans again. Not even on your day off. We were one step away from Disney in maintaining the fantasy. Story 27 Jesus. Where to start? My favorite first. Guy came in wearing a cap that had cocaine and caviar on it. A girl wearing Daisy Dukes. Many tracksuits. Football shirt, dirty suit. Leggings that are far too stretched and almost clear on the bum. Short skirts, jeans. Story 28 not quite the same as the questions. But when I worked in retail sales, I remember a guy walked in, saluted me with an odd level of enthusiasm, told me he had just gotten out of the service and asked for an application. He was also drunk as and smelled like BO and gin. He didn't get an interview. Story 29 I actually got a job by showing up scruffy. At the time I'd been working construction trying to get back into office work, saw a now hiring side and just wandered in and asked for an application. The person who handed me the application was nice and polite to my face, then told another coworker that guy has no chance, showing up like that. The other coworker was my cousin, who informed the HR manager, who called me to apologize and invited me for an interview. I didn't even know what had transpired until my cousin told me later, but I said oh no worries I was just passing through and obviously I'll be appropriately dressed if you hire me ha. Made sure I was properly cleaned up and dressed appropriately for the interview, got the job and ended up working there for 5 years. Had they not made some stupid remark I may not have even been considered. Story 30 I had a man show up in very dirty badly ripped jeans and a tattered ball cap. He had also decided to dye his hair pumpkin orange and pull it through the back hole in the ball cap. No ponytail, just contained by the open hole on the cap. Story 31 a guy in a Harley t-shirt came by applying for a job. What was so special was his Harley hat and the half-smoked and butted-out cigarette he had behind his ear. I actually thought it was a practical joke or something. Story 32 at my last job we had a video interview with a guy who didn't realize that he was also on camera. He took the interview shirtless and in his bed. After about 3 minutes he figured it out and faked a disconnect. Story 33 I went to a group interview once for a job at Massage Envy. One girl wore a graphic mini dress from Hot Topic with Converse. Another wore jeans and a t-shirt. There were 6 of us, and only 2 of us were even remotely appropriately dressed. I was astounded at some of the answers they gave as well. Story 34 very low-cut V-neck top. I tried to stay professional, but I think she caught me looking at her breasts at least 8 times. I did hire her, and she ended up being an okay employee. She left after about a year, and we slept together shortly thereafter. Story 35. Not an employer, but my current workplace hosted a small job fair. This lady came in wearing a transparent shirt with no bra. My boss, who was a lady at the time, immediately turned the lady around and pushed her out the front door. Guy comes in later that same day wearing skin-tight short shorts and a very large blue tank top. Guy was nice and respectful during his interview. Boss told him she would have hired him on the spot if he had only put on something casual or professional. Edit grammar. Story 36. I had an interviewee for an entry-level customer service position at a large company. Show to our interview 15 minutes late in Hello Kitty pajama bottoms, a matching backpack, a bright pink hoodie, and warm and fuzzy slippers. I didn't even bother with the interview as she was late, but that has to be one of the most unprofessional attire I've seen in my hiring experience. The other I recall was a young woman interviewing for a customer service position at the airline I was at in an extremely low-cut blouse and short skirt, all in black. Mentioned something during the interview about how she hasn't smoked weed in a couple weeks and wanted to make sure we knew she wasn't high. Story 37. I was on the other end, I guess. I always presumed that you were to dress your best when it came to interviews, so when I went to a large group interview for the local amusement park as a teen, I wore my go-to-interview outfit, a casual dress, a cardigan sweater, sensible flats. I walk inside and there was just a mass of teens wearing sweatpants, yoga pants, sweatshirts, short shorts, spaghetti strap tank tops, and so forth. I was so out of place and the other teens were making fun of me. A boy tried to flip up my dress. I left crying because when it came to narrowing it down on who to hire, I was told I was unqualified. The interviewer said quite loudly to the next girl that I was too fat and prudish to work at an amusement park. I weighed 160 pounds and my dress went to my knees. I hardly thought it was prudish. Looking back, why I was crying over it, I guess I was just really sensitive. Story 38. So I had a test shoot, which is like an interview for models. We were supposed to be painting on swimwear. The model showed up with jeans and a hoodie and a hat, and refused to take any of them off for the shoot. She had no idea that she might have to disrobe despite the fact that she applied for the position of body paint model, and was told that the photo test would involve a painted-on swimsuit. The point, no matter what job you are after, consider the requirements. Story 39. Sparkly top with leggings, flats, and long black hair down to her waist. Not very combed. It was a very corporate job and a very client-facing position. Story 40. For a design engineer position, this shows up in a near see-through purple sleeveless midriff shirt, leopard print bra that could be clearly seen through the shirt, white spandex-type pants that you could also clearly see a matching leopard print panties and sandals. HR did their thing and passed her on to me to do the skills assessment test. 6 math, 6 logic questions, and then a CAD drawing that she was to reproduce in Solid Edge. Her CV shows 4 years experience. I gave her 1 hour to do the stuff, got distracted and gave her almost an hour and a half, returned her to HR and checked what she had done. Really, this woman got 0 of the questions right and had a few lines drawn, but that was it. Not even a finished sketch to do a protrusion. So fail across the board. I see the HR person walk the woman out and comes to my office on her way back to her office. She said something like not sure what she thought she was applying for, but it sure isn't prostitution. Did she do well on the tests at least? Nope, 0. This woman's CV showed a BS in mechanical engineering and 8 years experience as a design engineer in the OG industry. Scrolling down to see if someone posted about the time I showed up to a professional interview in a grease-stained blouse and knuckles. I blew a tire on the way there and had to change it on the side of the highway. Story 41. I always found the women coming in with very tight tops, showing a lot of cleavage entertaining. Bonus points for having parts of the bra visible when sitting upright, and having it stand out in color like black top, pink bra. I have no idea if that works somewhere. For us it was just a did you see X almost flasher to impress us, kind of laugh when reviewing the candidates. We still were hiring based on competence. Story 42. Not an employer but saw this happen. Healthcare company was bought out and we all had to re-interview for our jobs. Guy comes in a tank top, shorts, flip-flops and a gun holster. Thankfully left gun in car. Story 43. This one was me. Just moved across the country and needed a job. Had spent the last 4 years as a cook and had a pretty good letter of recommendation from my old boss. Applied at a handful of kitchen work and got 2 callbacks the same day, both wanting to set up interviews for the following day. Next day I realized I hadn't really packed anything too professional, mainly just shorts, t-shirts and tank tops. I moved from Tasmania to Darwin, thought it, and ended up wearing track pants and a t-shirt as well as Converse to the interviews. I ended up being offered both jobs. Story 44. 2 sizes too small skin-tight plastic-looking leggings that were bright pink, strapless crop top exposing her beer belly and barely covering her. She wasn't wearing a bra and I saw a bit of nip. She was also wearing these extremely high heels that looked like sneakers. It was bizarre. The job she was interviewing for was a receptionist for a nice office. Story 45. Someone came in to interview at my job wearing a Levi's t-shirt with the sleeves ripped off, Daisy Dukes, and pink flip-flops covered in pom-poms. It was January in the UK. I don't understand why she wasn't blue with cold. The look my manager gave me as she led this woman to the interview room was amazing. Not as bad as some of the others here, but it gave us a good laugh for a few days. Story 46. Other end of the question. But I was once interviewed by a man and a woman, with the lady wearing a very low-cut top, cleavage everywhere, very distracting and unprofessional way to conduct an interview. Story 47. This will probably be buried, but here goes. I was working retail at a clothing store. Dude is driving a super loud motorcycle, pulls up onto the sidewalk and parks directly in front of the entrance, essentially blocking both doors. He strolls inside without taking his helmet off, walks right up to the counter and pulls a crudely rolled up application out of his jacket and hands it to me. Still rolled up. Please take off your full-face motorcycle helmet before trying to apply for a job. Story 48. I remember we had a group interview for my job. Hate those companies that put you through that, and one of the guys was wearing a swimsuit and a really tight swim shirt. He said he was at a pool party and didn't have time to go home and change. He legit said, "Hey, I'm not about to give up going out and having fun with friends, because it's a social norm to dress up for job interviews." He didn't get the job, edit afterthought. He was adamant about how he can still be serious and professional while wearing a swimsuit, and I kinda want to give him credit for the bold move. It probably would have worked on me, lol. Story 49. I had a woman show up in a dress so short she couldn't sit without showing her snooch. I work HR at a government school for at-risk teenagers. My boss refused to even meet her when he saw her struggling to pull it down in the lobby. I would love to know her thought process as she poured herself into it that morning. Story 50. I was waiting for my interview at a vet clinic, vet tech nurse at the time, and the girl ahead of me was wearing Daisy Duke shorts, sunglasses, a very small tank top, and flip-flops. This was in summer in Southern California, but still. According to the hiring manager, who told me the story later, she never once removed the sunglasses and she did not get the job. I was wearing nice pants and a blouse and closed-toe shoes and had scrubs in the car in case they wanted a working interview as well. Story 51. Back when I managed a hotel, I was interviewing this girl for a front desk position. She's probably 20. I was 24 at the time. She was put together well and the 15-minute interview went well. She was personable and seemed to have her head on straight. Interview was wrapping up and I was about to offer her the job when she says she really needs the job and would if I gave it to her. I declined and told her we'd be in touch in a few days. I didn't hire her, but I'm sure she didn't have a hard time finding employment elsewhere. On the flip side, I kind of interviewed in a Canadian tuxedo because I was off of work and getting lunch with a friend when the friend got a call to help with something and sent me instead since we were in the same line of work and he was working and couldn't sneak out. Turned out the help that was needed was a replacement for a consultant they didn't like and they wanted someone to offer a second opinion. Apparently my opinion was good enough for them to offer me a full-time job on the spot. So not NSFW inappropriate, but I was definitely underdressed compared to the room full of suits. Story 52. We had a guy, early 20s, come in last week for an interview in a t-shirt, sweatpants, and flip-flops with socks. He drove to the interview, but when asked if he had a driver's license, he stated that he did not and that he had driven to the interview illegally. He claimed that, if we hired him, he would drive to work every day illegally. We still hired him, FML. Story 53. Kinda related, but stage checks for flight training at my university are kinda like mini-job interviews because they go on your permanent record and you have to show up in formal wear because aviation has a massive for professionalism, which is probably a good thing. So this college aviation student walks into the check pilot's office with a really short skirt. She tries to sit down 3 times but her basic instinct stops her from doing so. So she tells the check pilot that she would rather stand for the entire oral section of the stage check, and yes, I know the word oral is sometimes used to refer to acts, haha my sides. The oral part of the check can last between 1 and 3 hours. The check pilot was not an idiot though and told her to go home and put some pants on. Story 54. I'm a receptionist at a law firm, and back in the winter we were hiring for a new legal assistant. We had this lady come in through a hiring company, and she straight up told the hiring company and us that she wasn't going to dress professionally because she feels we shouldn't judge her on her looks or how she dresses for an interview. She literally came in wearing a ratty pair of sweatpants and a bleached stained sweater, and honestly she had this sense of entitlement that came off as rude when I greeted her. Needless to say, she didn't get the job. Story 55. I accidentally went to an interview wearing flip-flops once. It was August, and my car didn't have AC and I had to drive for over an hour to get there, so I wore my flip-flops on the drive. I definitely brought my interview shoes with me, but I completely forgot I was wearing flip-flops by the time I got there, so I didn't change my shoes. I still got the job somehow, though. Story 56. She didn't wear it to a job interview, so I suppose it's really not fair to count it, but this woman applied for a job relating to social media and her Instagram was on her resume, so I checked it out and she had a lot of pictures of her in tiny bikinis drinking and having fun in tropical environments. Seemed odd to me that she'd put it on her resume. It wasn't 100 that, but there were a lot of them scattered throughout more casual Instagram stuff. Story 57. Was interviewer for a receptionist position at an executive office. Girl presented well on paper and thought she would be our top runner. She was from out of town, and when I contacted her she happened to be in town for a summer visit, so came in for an interview. She showed up in an outfit that could only be considered suitable for a nightclub, with an open back dress, including glitter sparkle eyeshadow, fake lashes and fake nails. I considered that she could have not packed to be prepared for a job interview, but the excess nightclub makeup was poor taste. Story 58. There was no formal interview, but on the first day a t-shirt that read "Will for beer" across the back. This was a 35-year-old woman. She didn't last long. Flip side, I turned up to a job interview in suit and tie, to find the 2 interviewers wearing shorts and t-shirts. Story 59. I was part of an interview team of 3, Applicants would meet with each of us separately. I was third. She walked in with a blouse cut so low it looked like she was smuggling two bald guys. Story 60 at my last job. My agent liked if the whole office would interview candidates to help with team dynamic. We had a lady from a small bum town send a resume and call multiple times till my agent set an interview as she was looking to move to our city. Agent takes this for tenacity and not meth addiction and invites her in. The lady is a 50-something meth head who was fortunate to lose her back teeth. She was tweaking during the interview, and when I spoke with her she wouldn't sit still in her chair. Not only that, but she bad-mouthed her current employer the entire time. Not a good look on a candidate. And she was wearing a velvet leopard print mini dress with ripped black stockings. She didn't get the job. Story 61. I just had this conversation with my boss the other day. We've been interviewing people to work out in the shop as an assembler. I don't expect people to show up in a suit for this type of position, but I do expect a little bit of effort to make a good first impression. Nice pants and a tucked-in collared shirt is good. So many people show up in jeans, hoodie, and ball cap. I hate them. Story 62. Emergency administration job in a hospital. I saw her in the coffee shop before in the smallest skirt imaginable. Thought, geez, that's short, and that's it. Then I saw her going in for an interview with the manager later. Very pretty girl. She took her blazer off and I could see she was in a very revealing strappy camisole. Asked the manager later on how it went, and apparently all she wanted to know was would she be working very closely with the doctors. Unfortunately the hospital does get a lot of admin staff that are just after doctor interaction. This isn't a fucking TV show.